Procurement is an absolute dark art, both as a commissioner and a kind of bidder for work. And I don't know anyone that's ever really got it perfect. I think local authority procurement teams really struggle to understand what it is we're trying to do, which is not a great starting point because you're sort of failing the first hurdle. Quality of the answer often depends on the quality of the question first asked. So I think we as the commissioning client have a responsibility first and foremost to write a really good brief. And we don't always do that.
It's all in the brief. The best brief will deliver the best outcome. Hello, welcome to Talking Place, the podcast bringing placemakers and storytellers together to talk about place. I'm your host, Tanisha Raffiuddin. I am the founder of Concept Culture, a creative agency in London, passionate about creating purposeful brands and telling powerful stories. In this episode, it is my absolute pleasure to talk place with John Stiles, Placemaking Manager at Brent Council, recorded live at the Brent Civic Centre in the heart of Wembley Park. John is an architect and town planner. As the Placemaking Manager at the London Borough of Brent, he leads on all aspects of place, including developing strategic master plans for some of the borough's growth areas. John joined the public sector in 2019 as a public practice associate, working in the property development team at Transport for London, now known as Places for London. Prior to this, he worked at private practices such as McCrainer Lavington and Bell Phillips, gaining a breadth of experience in the housing and education sectors. John is also a member of the Folkestone and Hyde Place panel and has lectured and been a visiting critic at numerous architecture and planning schools across the UK. In this episode, John shares his journey from private practice architect to public sector placemaker, why he believes impact can happen faster in local government, and how councils are getting braver, rethinking partnerships, procurement, and even how they generate value. We talk about belonging, the social contract between people and place, what it really means to shape somewhere that people care for, and that cares for them back. From the evolving identity of Brent to the future of placemaking, John shares honest insights, challenges the status quo, and offers a hopeful vision for more inclusive, participatory urban futures. So please do stick around till the end. All right, let's talk place. John, welcome to Talking Place.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure, and thank you for hosting us here at the Brent Civic Centre, the heart of all the action.
Yeah.
So John, you've had a very interesting career trajectory. You started off as an architect in private practice, and now you're in public practice as Placemaking Manager at Brent Council. Tell us what that journey has been like.
I suppose it feels like quite a long journey. I wanted to be an architect from as young an age as I can remember. It started with drawing my ideal house, and then with a bit of parental encouragement that became perhaps you want to be an architect, and not long after that sort of became my whole mission in my very young life. And so I ended up going to university, went through all the stages of the architectural education process, which, as you know, is not short. And I found myself in practice after I finished my studies, and I enjoyed it, but there was something that never really felt quite right. And I had at times really enjoyed the academic environment, but after a while found that quite constraining and perhaps too conceptual, too detached from the reality of the job. Really enjoyed lots of aspects of the job, particularly the kind of technical parts and actually getting to learn how to build things. But then it started to become quite monotonous and repetitive. And I think there was always something unresolved in me. And it was at the time I was working for Bell Phillips Architects.
Yeah.
And it was really my first sort of experience of working with public sector clients. And it was around the time that the public sector was starting to become more active again after this sort of very long period of dormancy. And it felt very exciting. But it was also clear that because of what had happened to the public sector and the kind of drain of architectural and other built environment skills from the public sector, that there was a real need for people with that expertise who perhaps had some understanding of what it was like to be a client, but then also, you know, understanding what it means to be the consultant to a local authority. And so I felt, perhaps rather arrogantly, I don't know, but I felt that I had experience and the right skills to kind of bring to a local authority. So then public practice became a thing in 2018. And I remember seeing that and thinking, that looks really exciting. I'd really like to be a part of that. And in 2019, I left my career in architecture and was successful in joining the second cohort of public practice, and everything sort of went from there, really.
Oh, wow. So you were the second cohort of public practice.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And it's obviously flourished and grown and had a major impact on the sector since then. Would you recommend it?
I mean, absolutely. I think for anyone who is perhaps struggling to find their fit in the architectural or indeed another built environment profession, for anyone who wants to do socially responsible work, for anyone who wants to have an impact in a much shorter time frame, because let's not forget that architecture is a really slow career. You know, the wins and the outcomes take so long to deliver sometimes.
Absolutely.
Whereas in a local authority, you know, despite the misconception that it's slow and caught up in bureaucracy and red tape, actually it's, you know, you can make an impact at lots of different scales, sometimes very small, sometimes very large, but you can make an impact in a much shorter space of time. So I think for anyone who is inclined in that way, public practice is a great door opener to a career in that world, I think.
That's so interesting that you talked about making an impact in a short space of time. And we're living in this world of instant gratification. And I guess, well, you're here to do some myth busting for us and enlighten us and our audience of the joys of working in public practice.
Yeah, so I guess it kind of, I think your perception of what an outcome or what impact is changes when you work in a local authority. And, you know, it can be as simple as just changing a process or developing a template for something that never existed before, because I think historically local authorities have had to be very reactive to situations. You know, there's always been a scarcity of resource, even in the slightly more, you know, economically favourable times. We're always trying to do a lot with not much. And so what I've found is that often means we struggle to get ahead of the game on things. So if you come in and I think, you know, I'm an architect, I think lots of architects have, you know, inherent problem solving skills and are very generally process minded.
Yes.
Coming into an organization like this with that mindset can be really beneficial. And so you can change something very small in a very short space of time that actually has a big impact in terms of how people work, or, you know, how the service area that you work in more generally functions. But then, of course, there's the kind of bigger things as well. And I think the irony of it being so driven by governance and process and democratic accountability, you know, we are working in a highly political environment. Despite all of that, there is this kind of absence of rules in a way. You know, you can almost always find a way to do something, you know, do what you want. And I think for me personally, the real joy of what I do, particularly here at Brent, is navigating all of that process and governance and somehow managing to find a way to deliver something and make something happen. And it isn't always easy. Sometimes you're tearing your hair out and you think, why on earth did I ever try to do this? But I found, and maybe it's just luck, maybe it's the benefit of this particular organisation, I don't know. You know, I've only worked for this local authority, but I found, perhaps it's my, you know, dogged tenacity to just always keep going, but always managed to find a way to deliver. And I think, you know, given the challenges that are put in your way because of the process and the governance and everything, that's, you know, that's a big achievement. And there are lots of things that I'm very proud of that I and my team and my colleagues have achieved here.
That's amazing. You're really selling it to me. I wish I could go back in time now. 2018 actually was the time I pivoted as well from traditional practice. So I guess if public practice was around at the time, maybe my journey would have had a slightly different twist and turn as well. So for those listening, you know, and you're not quite finding your place in traditional architecture, check out public practice. I'm sure they'd be happy to have you. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's quite commendable what you said about, you know, finding a way to make it happen despite the perception of bureaucracy and rules. And I think that's really heartening to hear in this economy and in this whole kind of doom and gloom scenario that we as a sector find our ways in. So it's really heartening to know that there are people in local government like yourselves who are pushing the agenda. So coming on to technicalities of Talking Place as a podcast, and this is a question I ask everybody, as you know. What does place mean to you? And what does good look like?
I mean, I think one's understanding of place is perhaps quite personal to the individual and possibly, you know, quite an ephemeral thing. But I suppose for me, it's a good place is somewhere where you feel an inherent sense of belonging. You know, there's a permissive nature to it, a sense of conviviality, things happening, things of interest, somewhere maybe where you don't feel all of these emotions in one go, but somewhere where you feel excited or, you know, active, or somewhere by contrast where you feel at peace and calm. I think those for me are the sort of essential, again, very personal, ephemeral qualities that make a place. I think that point about belonging is really important because I think there's so much of the built environment and public realm that feels like it's not for lots of types of people. I think obviously there's a lot of dialogue in the industry around perception of safety.
Right.
And I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. And I think it's critical that all types of people feel safe and comfortable, and that kind of sense of belonging, or even I suppose in some way a kind of stake in the place.
Right.
You know, there's almost, I think, an implicit social contract set up between good, successful places and the people that inhabit them.
Yeah, I love that. The social contract. Yes, we should feel that we are welcome and that we belong in a place, and the place is obliged to give that to us. Is that am I interpreting that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that we're also responsible for it.
Right. Yes.
You
Yes.
know,
It's a two-way. It's a two-way thing, right?
Two-way
Yeah,
thing, because
yeah.
you see so much disrespect in the way that
Right.
the public realm is treated, and I think there's lots of reasons why that is. Perhaps, you know, this general sense of disenfranchisement that a lot of people feel right now because of what we're going through as a society. But I think good, successful places foster that sense of responsibility. People want to care for them and look after them because the place and the space fundamentally is caring for and looking after them.
Absolutely.
And I guess that's what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, you know, because the place is taking care of you, you then naturally want to take care of the place as well. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And now on a more personal note, what is your most favorite place in the world?
I mean, this is a really difficult one. And I think that, you know, there are lots of places close to home that I could talk about. But I suppose one that really stands out in my mind and is a place that I have been back to many times is the Plaza Catalunya in Barcelona.
Right, yeah.
And I suppose Barcelona generally is a city. Yeah. I think it's obviously a planner's dream.
Yes.
With that beautifully rigorous grid.
Absolutely,
of blocks.
I know.
The climate.
Yeah.
Something always quite magical about a city by the sea.
Yeah.
But I think the Plaza Catalunya being in the Gothic quarter, which is actually the sort of unplanned part of Barcelona, you know, just a stone's throw from Las Ramblas. You know, there's something about the quality of that, albeit in a very tourist-heavy part of the city, and probably now, you know, much more, you know, riddled with Airbnbs and, you know, much more than when I first went there in 2007. But just as a quality of space, the scale of it, the types of uses that sort of spill out onto it, it's a meeting point, it's a place to sit and just watch the world go by. I think it will always have a very special place in my heart. And as I say, is somewhere that I go back to very often.
Oh, I love that. It's, as you were speaking, I was just visualizing everything that you were describing. But maybe, you know, it's been so successful and people from all over the world visit it, and it now is increasingly having an anti-tourism agenda. What do you think about that? Can a place become too successful?
I think it can, and I do think the sort of Instagram and TikTok craze that sees people pushing boundaries of what is permissive and not, right. and I suppose this comes back to what I was saying before. I think that sense of where boundaries are is progressively being eroded.
Right.
I think it's a very difficult one. I mean, Spain, for lots of reasons, and other countries like it, have always had a big pull, particularly for Northern Europeans, you know, because the climate, the landscape is very different, and it's an escape for us. But we have to remember that it's people's homes, you know, and it comes down to everything. And, you know, I speak a moderately good level of Spanish. So whenever I'm in Spain, I always try to make something of a contribution in that way. And it's very difficult, you know, to go to every country and to know the language. But I think it's important that you make an effort and you have that respect. You know, you are a visitor in someone else's home. And I think that is perhaps what we've lost. I think that sense of respect, that sense of where boundaries are and need to be drawn. And so I think whilst tourism remains a considerable economic benefit to Spain as a country and other countries like it, I can understand where that backlash is coming from, because people are, well, generally as a society, we're taking more and more than we should, really. You know, you can apply that to how we treat the environment. Yeah. So I understand it, and I hope that it finds a way to resolve itself.
Likewise, absolutely. I am also of that hope that the good tourism outweighs the bad tourism, and that we all, as conscious travelers, respect the places that we visit, so we get to visit them again and again.
Exactly.
So from sunny Barcelona, although I feel like on a day like today we might be warmer than Barcelona, back to Brent in northwest London. So you are a placemaking manager of Brent Council. What does placemaking mean to you in this role? And what is the story of Brent as a place that you would like to share?
Well, I suppose I should start by saying that I do find the word placemaking problematic.
Gosh, like everyone else on this podcast, join the club, John. Tell us.
Because as the great Daisy Froud once said to me, places are almost always already made. And that has always rung in my ears whenever the word placemaking gets used. And I suppose, like any sort of term, its meaning gets progressively diluted as it becomes more kind of commonly used. But I suppose I would prefer place shaping, because I guess that implies that you're working with something that already exists and trying to shape it or reshape it in some way. So I guess that's important to kind of get off my chest as a first part of my answer to your question.
So are you lobbying to change the name of your job title?
Not for now.
Okay.
No.
All right.
I've only been in this role for about 4 months. So I think I'm just going to let it bed in before I try and rock the boat any further.
Fair, that's fair.
So then what does
place shaping mean to you?
What does place shaping mean to me? Well, I suppose, if I go off the current composition of my team, it is a team that I consider to bring together a range of place-related disciplines. So we have an urban designer, we have a heritage and conservation expert, we have a tree officer, a landscape officer, and an ecologist. So across the sort of built and natural environment, we have everything covered. And I suppose if I think back to how I just sort of defined what a place means to me, it is all of those things. Right. It is both a built and a natural environment. And so the fact that we have all of that expertise together in one team, I think is really important, because it allows us to think strategically across all of those disciplines and come together to understand how all of those things relate to each other, and then apply that to the different parts of Brent.
Amazing. And going back to the story, so there's obviously a perception of what Brent is.
Yeah.
What is the story you want to share?
I mean, I think Brent broadly has kind of 2 chapters in its history in terms of its identity as a place. A significant amount of it was laid out as a sort of middle class suburb, at the sort of late 19th, early 20th century, off the back of the Metropolitan Railway. And so certainly in the north part of the borough, where we are in Wembley and sort of beyond, you will see that suburban character, in the rows and rows of semi-detached and detached houses with sort of mock Tudor features and so on. The south part of the borough is much more kind of 19th century Victorian part of the city, and I guess has had a range of different identities over time. Areas that were once affluent, now home to migrant populations from around the world, and generally some of our more deprived areas, probably as a result of that. But then in the sort of northern part of the borough, that what would have been predominantly white middle-class suburbia has given way to a massive and vibrant influx of diaspora communities from all around the world. And I think that has been prompted in large part due to the proximity to Heathrow Airport.
Right, yeah.
It's very much on the doorstep to the rest of the world in that way.
Yeah.
And I think now what that gives the borough is this really rich and at times quite complex set of place identities, you know, and I think Brent means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah.
There are still pockets of the Irish community in parts of Kilburn and Cricklewood, which was at one time probably one of the more dominant communities in that area and has progressively moved on or been displaced by other communities. But it's still there, and most of the pubs that you will see around Wembley are actually Irish pubs.
Right.
That still hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of pocket of that, but Wembley is very much an Asian area, you know, and it's got a wonderful kind of range of things here for that community that give life to this as an area. And I think that sits in quite interesting contrast against the sort of very imperial references that Wembley and Wembley Park makes to the kind of past and the British Empire, because it was the home of the British Empire exhibition in the 1920s.
Oh.
And a lot of the street names and place names carry these references to the imperial age, yet it's one of the most diverse parts of London.
Yes.
So there's an interesting sort of, I suppose, tension
there. Yes.
So yeah, I think it's got a very, there are these two distinct parts, but then certainly in that sort of second part, there's so much richness and interest, and it's ever changing, you know, with the gentrification that's happening. And I can't remember, I saw it recently somewhere on LinkedIn or something, some of the most heavily gentrified areas in London, and Wembley came out as one of those. And I mean, the regeneration has led to a new demographic coming into the area, predominantly younger professionals. There's a big East Asian community coming from China and Korea and Japan, living in built-to-rent accommodation here.
Yeah.
So it is ever changing. You know, it's never one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point about, you know, various diaspora finding home in Wembley, I have heard on good authority that Wembley has some of the best amazing Indian food offering in all of London. But to your point about something that's ever changing, and then so the story is also ever changing. And I've had the privilege of working on the project in Neaston on the placemaking sustainability action plan. So that was the first time I dug my teeth into the Neaston story as a start and the Brent story as a wider piece. And I learned so much in the process about all the various communities that call Neaston home for one, and then Brent home. And I learned that Bob Marley did a stint in Neaston as well, and they take pride in in that, and there are murals and street art dedicated to his memory and his legacy. And you touched upon Wembley Park, and Wembley Park has recently been named by the Times as the best destination to live in, or one of the best destinations to live in the UK. I think it's a list of 10 or 20. Why do you think the scheme has seen so much?
I suppose, and I should qualify, I also live here.
Yes,
so
that's true, yeah.
I'm coming at this from personal experience.
Right.
I think in many ways it does embody that idea of the 15-minute neighbourhood. Everything is on your doorstep. I think it's also, I mean, it's not without its challenges. So we have to remember that there's a national stadium here.
Yes, yes, we cannot forget that. Yes.
Hosts a significant number of sporting and non-sporting events.
Yes.
So it's an incredibly managed place as a result of that, because those events have a very big impact on the area.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, for me personally, my place of work is here. So that, you know, that works really well for me. And the office has very much kind of become an extension of my home and vice versa. But, you know, there are shops, there are restaurants, there are bars, there's a range of gyms, you know, everything that I, as a, you know, person in my sort of mid to late 30s would need is here, you know, and I can access it all on foot. So I suppose in that way, you know, thinking about what people want from their urban environment in a city, having amenities on your doorstep, facilities and things that you can use both, you know, in your professional life, but also personally, that I think is really important. And let's not forget that you're half an hour tube ride from the centre of town.
That's true.
So, you know, like many other success stories across the city in terms of regeneration, that public transport accessibility is a really key part of that. But yes, I mean, I guess coming back to the stadium and the events, those are inevitably very disruptive. But I think between all the different organisations that are involved, the council, the FA, Quintain, the police, they are generally very well managed. And often, once they've happened, very little trace of them happening is left afterwards. And it goes back to being the increasingly kind of residential mixed-use neighbourhood that it's becoming.
Right. But these are not forever homes. They are built to rent. They are transient in nature. So what is the nature of the community that lives here? Is it also transient in nature? Can the build to rent scheme actually foster a sense of long-term community?
I mean, I think there's a big place for build to rent in the housing market. I think particularly under the current circumstances, I think it offers a degree of security, a degree of benefit to people. You, I think on the whole, generally get a lot for your money. You know, you get a nicely designed new home. Often, you know, they're finished to a very high specification. You then get a whole raft of communal facilities on top of that. You know, some of the developments around here have communal lounges and dining rooms and places, you know, that you can book for big events, places to work, you know, offices, quiet rooms, roof terraces, gyms. So I think for that demographic, you know, the kind of young professional demographic, it offers a lot for a sort of moderate price. I think if you were on the sort of open market, you'd probably struggle to find something with that level of offering, you know, that's that managed for similar. So I think in that way, it really does have a place. I think the point about transience is a really important one, but I don't know whether it's any more or less transient than living in private rented accommodation in London is.
That's true. Yeah.
I've lived here for nearly 20 years and probably moved about 15 times in that time. You know, and that's just reflective of the general instability in the rental market as a whole. So, but then I think there are people that put down roots here. There are people that have lived here for a long time. There's a very big dog community or dog owner community in Wembley Park.
Right.
So, I mean, I often find now that I recognise the dog before I recognise the person walking it. But, you know, Quintain were actually a very early adopter of allowing pets, allowing their tenants to have pets.
Yes.
And this proved really popular during lockdown when lots of people bought pets.
That's true. Yeah.
And they've built in a lot of infrastructure to support that. So there are dog parks all across the estate, which are, you know, always bustling with generally the same dogs and people.
Yeah.
Like I say, spot the dog before the person.
Yeah.
But so even though I don't know these people and don't talk to them, there is a kind of sense that people are here, people are staying here. And I think that's only increasing as the estate matures. So with each new residential development that is completed, a whole nother influx of people arrive, you know, and puts down roots to some extent. And it does contribute to that kind of sense of a critical mass. You know, it feels really inhabited and bustling as a place, much more so actually than when I first moved here in 2021, as we were coming out of the back end of the pandemic. It did feel quite dead and quite quiet. Yeah. And in that 4 years, it's really significantly changed.
Yeah, and we can owe it to the dog parks.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. So coming back to Brent and, you know, social value increasingly becoming, one can argue, a buzzword, you know, the S and ESG and all of that. But it's a key metric these days in development. And as a council, how do you ensure that it's delivered in a way that truly benefits your residents?
I don't have much experience of dealing with social value through procurement processes. Probably one of the main things that we do as part of that is secure contributions towards training and skills and sort of apprenticeships and that sort of thing. And we have a really fantastic team here that deals with that and tries to get young people opportunities off the back of major development. So that's one thing that we do. I suppose in terms of my team, one of the big things that we look at is how planning contributions are invested both in infrastructure, and I suppose by infrastructure I mean physical stuff like road improvements, cycle improvements, and that kind of built stuff, but also things like social infrastructure as well, and creating opportunities for third sector and voluntary organisations and social enterprises to continue or start, you know, making an impact in the borough in some way. And I think we have a really good understanding and good relationship with lots of organisations locally. And actually, when you think about the general economic picture of the borough, you know, we have a lot of deprivation in some parts. The level of activity that there is amongst our population in terms of giving back, you know, and being entrepreneurial and setting up all kinds of things to benefit other people, it's really amazing. And I think we do whatever we can through SIL and Section 106 money to try and facilitate that where possible.
That's interesting that you said that, because I also felt that, you know, the through the community engagement work we did in Neasden, that I felt that even though Neasden is what it is, and that's and it's reality that people had a lot of pride for the place, and they did want to give back and do with whatever little resources they had, give back to the community and create something good for the community, which was very heartening to learn in that process. So coming back to doing less with more, and you alluded to this in your intro. So many councils are expected to deliver ambitious projects with limited resources. How do you navigate this challenge? And are there any creative funding models or partnership models that have helped drive projects forward?
I mean, I think it's important to say, and I sort of touched on this at the beginning, but in team, generally, we're quite lean on physical, human resources. But I think our team punches above its weight in terms of ambition. And so that's a really strong starting point. So we know that we haven't got much, but what we do have has a really strong desire to do stuff and make things happen. In terms of funding models, I mean, I think we could have a whole conversation about the ethics and appropriateness of councils outsourcing work and services to the private sector. And that has obviously been something which has probably more recently been something that we've tended to do. And from some of my own experiences working in other parts of the private sector, there is this, what I find to be slightly strange deference to the private sector and the market as being this sort of all-seeing, all-knowing, all-benevolent thing. And I don't know if I wholly agree with that. I think there's a place for partnerships with the private sector, but I think you could also find that many parts of the private sector are only interested in extracting value from the public sector.
That's interesting.
And we need to be mindful of that. And I think the sort of shift that feels like is starting to emerge now is that actually the public sector is becoming more emboldened out of this crisis and learning lessons from the private sector and saying, well, look at what they do. We can do that too. We've got the skills to do that. And it wouldn't take much for us to actually get to a position where we could do that ourselves in as kind of lean and efficient a way as the private sector might do it. So in my team now, for example, one of the tasks I have to sort of begin focusing on is thinking about how we can generate revenue from what we can do.
Right, yeah.
So rather than just being a sort of in-house resource for the planning team and being sort of strategic, actually thinking, well, we've got a fully qualified architect, 2 fully qualified architects, qualified building conservationists, qualified ecologists, etc. What about their skills can we actually turn into services that we can sell, be it to other colleagues in the organisation? If the housing team want a feasibility study done for a site, why would they go and pay X amount of money to a private organisation to do that when we could do it for a fee, but probably a more competitive one? So that's the kind of mindset.
That's so interesting.
I know. And I
wonder if it's a bit worrying as well to the people listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I guess I would reassure, we're not coming for...
We're not here to take your jobs.
No, we're not here to take your jobs. But I think it's about public organisations knowing when to consult the public sector, when it's right and when it's timely. And most of the architects that I've talked to about this, they know that something like a very early stage feasibility study for a site, let's say, it's going to make them no money, and they will probably not, in the time and for the fee that they have, be able to give best value to us as the client, because you can't ever really substitute that local knowledge that we have as officers working in the organisation. So I think there are ways where we can find a place for ourselves in that market and we can still use the private sector when we need to, but we just need to be really sort of clever and inventive about those ways where actually we can probably do a better job for, for better value.
Yeah, makes sense.
And the great irony is that I never wanted to set up a practice, and now I somehow find myself on the precipice of doing that very thing. So it'll be interesting for me personally to kind of go through that process.
And why not? The way we're working, the way we're procuring work is changing. It's always changing. We need to do what we can to remain competitive, especially in this economy. But that segues nicely into the next section, talking about commissioning design teams. So when you're commissioning, when you need to commission design teams, architects, urban designers, and the like, what specifically are you looking for in the design team, and what would make a design team stand out to you as a client, as a commissioning client?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is that, and this is something I say all the time, the quality of the answer often depends on the quality of the question first asked. So I think we as the commissioning client have a responsibility first and foremost to write a really good brief. And we don't always do that. And whenever I've commissioned work myself, I've often gone and spoken to a range of architects and said, this is what I want to do. What would a good brief look like to you? And I've often used their feedback to help shape that fundamental question. And generally that has led to a betterment in the quality of answer that we then get back from architects. So I think that's a really important thing to say first and foremost. And then I guess it comes down to having confidence. It's a very risk-averse world generally, but given that the scarcity of resources, public organisations are incredibly risk-averse. And so we want a sense of confidence that the design team that's kind of presenting itself to us can deliver what we want, what we need, that they understand us, that they understand what our priorities are, that they've made some attempt to understand the place. I mean, you do see a lot of responses to things where it feels very cut and paste and not place specific. I haven't experienced... Are you
getting AI generated responses?
Nothing that sort of stands out as being particularly AI generated,
Right.
but I think obviously architects do a lot of bids, and I've been on the other side of it doing a lot of bids, and we recycle a lot of information because often bids are very costly and, time consuming pursuits for practices. And I guess that's also something to bear in mind. We need to, in that kind of asking the right question, are we asking too much of a consultant? Are we expecting too much? So it's procurement is an absolute dark art, both as a commissioner and a kind of bidder for work. And I don't know anyone that's ever really got it perfect, and maybe that's an impossible thing to achieve, but there are certainly ways in which it can be improved. So yes, I mean, to answer your question, I think a sense that the design team has made an attempt to understand us as a borough. What are we looking for? Do they understand the place? Do they understand what our concerns and what our priorities are?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And absolutely, I agree with you about having the right brief in place. Even as someone who commissions creative projects, it's all in the brief. The best brief will deliver the best outcome, categorically, hands down. So I'm 100% in agreement with you. So for the design teams listening out there, that's some good advice from John here. You alluded to procurement being a dark art. And there's a lot of discourse on social media around public procurement not being fit for purpose. What's your take on that?
Probably inclined to agree. And I think generally, from what I've experienced and what I've heard, I think local authority procurement teams really struggle to understand what it is we're trying to do, which is not a great starting point because you're sort of failing at the first hurdle. And I don't know what you do to fix that. I think procurement teams may well be quite transient. They may not be the most enjoyable places to work. I don't know. I'm just kind of getting a hint here, maybe. But there have been various points in my career where I've found that kind of golden person who gets it. And I mean, in terms of how you navigate an organization like this, that is the person that you need to make friends with.
Yeah.
Because they will, someone with a kind of can-do attitude, an open mind, someone, again, I suppose, with a bit of an architect's head, like a problem solver. Okay, this is where you want to get to. This is where we are. These are the constraints. How can we find a way through that? I think the problem with procurement is that it's so procedural. And I think that can breed a mindset of, only stay within the lines. If I can't understand it within those constraints, then the computer says no, basically. And that has got to change. And I think, again, I've found often actually finding ways to go around procurement and find another avenue. So legal colleagues have often been very helpful in terms of navigating that procurement process, because they understand things contractually and within the law and what you can and can't do. So that's often very helpful, and it has been very helpful in my time here at Brent when things with procurement have been more challenging.
But do you envision a scenario or a future where procurement can be fairer?
Yeah, I do. It's around the kind of frameworks that I've seen lots of people complaining about. And I think the how much money has been awarded, how the contract's been awarded via the GLA's Architecture and Urbanism panel has just recently been published. And it's not to name or shame anybody, but you can sense that there's a kind of disquiet in the industry about the level of time and effort taken to get on these frameworks in the first place. And then, there are lots of great practices on there that never see any work from it. And I think this sort of comes back to what I was saying earlier about the kind of risk-averse nature of everything, but, particularly around procurement. Organisations like us want a framework because, we want a kind of pre-approved set of suppliers that we can just go to. But that does, it can constrain innovation. It can narrow the scope of the question that's being asked. They can stagnate. It doesn't, if they're not refreshed regularly, then you're not bringing new ideas through. They tend to not favour young practices, smaller practices. You need to jump through all of these kind of financial hoops in order to get on them. So I think we have to, I guess, for it to improve, we have to reframe our understanding of risk.
That's a good one.
And perhaps be a bit braver, and I'm sure that there are other things that we can put in place to ensure, that there's proper scrutiny and risk management, while still trying to make it easier for architects and other consultants to do work with us. Because it just slows everything down, and it's creating, as you've observed, this kind of fatigue, I think, in the industry.
Yeah. Reframing our understanding of risk is a really, really good point. And you we've already touched upon how time consuming a bid submission is, and not cost effective, and the return on investment isn't high, particularly for the smaller businesses out there. And essentially, we don't want to disenfranchise or discourage the younger, smaller, up and coming practices out there to be part of the conversation. But we do have to find a way to make it work for everybody, I guess. But we are hopeful.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also, it's a point of ethics as well. And I think about this often. We get a lot of architects approaching us, asking if there are opportunities, and it breaks my heart, particularly at the moment, because there are so few. But I think also this point around doing work for free is a really important one to touch on. And I think there has historically and probably continues to be a great willingness from the architectural profession to do work for free. And I suppose, having been in that position myself, when you're in practice and you're doing work for free, isn't the most fulfilling thing, particularly if, you ultimately get nothing from it. And I suppose, I still consider myself as a registered architect, bound by a code of conduct, and I just will never want to entertain the idea of someone doing something for free, beyond what I would consider to be reasonable. If it's giving advice or, having a meeting, a one-off meeting, that, feels more acceptable than asking someone to kind of do a whole piece of work for you for nothing. I just, and I don't know how much that goes on in the public sector or beyond, but I just think that's a really negative habit that, is being perpetuated, that, we're just not interested in having anything to do with here.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And I think a lot of architects listening out there will also be glad to hear that as well. It's a very different world now, architecture, than when we first started. And I think that, to your point of being brave, I think architects are now, well, definitely the next generation, upcoming generation, are much braver and willing to pivot and do different and innovative things to, be part of the conversation. And now thinking long term, and this is the part where I like what I call future gazing. What does the next, I know in councils you have to think long-term vision. So what does the next 20 years look like for Brent?
I mean, hopefully one of continued growth. And I mean, we've got a lot of growth plans. We've adopted in the last 5 years 3 growth area master plans and supplementary planning documents. Some of the sites in those growth areas are being delivered or on their way to being delivered, but lots aren't. So I would hope that the next 15, 20 years will see significant progress in some of those areas, particularly in Staples Corner, where we've just not long ago adopted a master plan and design code that looks at not only delivering homes, but also industrial intensification, and how those kind of two things sit together to create a kind of new mixed use community in a really kind of challenging part of the borough. And then I suppose we're coming up to reviewing our local plan. So we're already starting to look ahead at, beyond those growth areas, what the other growth opportunities might be. And I think it's fair to say a lot of those are much more granular and intricate, specifically turning our minds to the more suburban parts of the borough and how those can be intensified, particularly in areas where there's really great public transport, areas where perhaps the kind of urban form isn't as now dense as it could or should be. And we're working at the moment with the London School of Architecture on some ideas as part of their design direction module, thinking about how we might look to intensify some of the suburban parts of the borough in the future. So that's really exciting, and a really great piece of research that we will have off the back of that collaboration. So I think thinking about how we can continue to find growth perhaps in those sort of harder to get to places.
Yeah, excellent. And are there any emerging trends that you think will shape Brent's future? I mean, we touched upon AI, for example. Is AI beginning to have an impact?
We are certainly looking at utilizing AI to improve efficiency in some of the things that we do. So particularly in the planning team, where a lot of reports are generated presently, by human hand, we're looking at how automation can start to help with that. Also around how we review and process objections to planning applications, document management, and that sort of thing. I don't think we're necessarily looking at it in any other way, but I think particularly where it can bring about service improvement and greater efficiency, not to relieve us of human resource, but to free
that's important to say.
to free that human resource up to do other things.
Yes, do things that only humans can do.
Exactly. I guess the other thing is just a kind of increasing awareness and focus on the climate crisis, but also around health and well-being as well. And the pandemic saw some parts of Brent really disproportionately impacted in terms of public health. And we've been doing some work in my team thinking about, not just about growth, but how that growth is sustainable, green, and healthy as well. And I think we have, I wouldn't say a public health crisis, but I think because of the demographic makeup of the borough, there are some demographically associated public health challenges. And I think we have a responsibility as place shapers, place makers, to try and find ways to address that through development. So I think I would both like and feel hopeful that we will do more in that sphere as well in the future.
And just to touch upon that a little bit further, so how do you hope placemaking will evolve in the future? What's your ideal vision of placemaking or place shaping as a discipline?
I mean, I think one that is ultimately participatory, that brings people with it on a journey. And we've already started doing that by establishing the Brent Community Review Panel. So we have, sitting alongside our quality review panel, which is made up of sort of built environment experts, we now have a panel of community representatives reviewing development proposals. And that has been a really fantastic way of bringing people into the process. And yes, it's only a group of 20 people, but they offer, a conduit to a much wider audience and allow us to kind of disseminate information via them, to just try and make people more engaged, and I think I'd like to see much more, many more young people involved in the process. We have a huge youth population in Brent, which I think it's fair to say probably feels slightly detached from all of this development and growth that's happening. So I think they've, because it's for them ultimately, I can no longer really consider myself a young person anymore. And so I think, I have a responsibility, colleagues, we have a responsibility to make sure that young people are part of that conversation. But I think also, in terms of kind of place generally, development generally, I think historically, so much of the dialogue was always about the building, the building being the answer. And I think where we've got to as an industry over the years now is a much greater understanding and awareness of place. It's not just the building, but it's everything else as well. And I think that's a really great shift. And I think we just have to keep making sure that it's moving in that direction.
No, absolutely. I share that vision as well. So obviously you work in in local government, in public service. If you could achieve one big thing for Brent, what would it be? Like, what do you hope your legacy looks like?
I mean, I think I would be happy walking away from the borough in the knowledge that I had in some way contributed to making the built and natural environment better than when I found it. And maybe that's the kind of easy answer, but yeah. I hope that we have made significant improvements in the way we do things and what we ask for in my time here through my relatively small contribution in the much wider, machine. I hope people would agree with that. I think it's getting progressively better. And so, yes, I mean, I've been here 5 years now. I don't know how long I have left, but hopefully a good run. I'm not planning on going anywhere just yet. So yeah, when the time does eventually come to walk away, I would hope that I would do so in the confidence that I left it a better place than when I found it.
What a beautiful sentiment. And that's a really nice way for us to round up our conversation. I do hope that for you, and I'm sure that will be the legacy that you leave whenever you decide to leave Brent. So what's next for you? What's next for John Stiles?
Well, I suppose in the short term, I'm still establishing my team. So we have some recruitment underway. So I think, short term, getting the team established and consolidated is a kind of key priority. Looking ahead, we'd really like to run another design awards, which we set up. We had the first one 2 years ago now. And that's a really great way of kind of recognizing all the great work that people are doing in the borough. Longer term, I don't know. I don't know whether a continued future in the public sector is my destiny or whether I will find myself back in the private sector at some point. I mean, I think I'm fiercely committed to the public sector. I have a lot of love for it. But I think it's good, I think my success in this role has largely been attributed to the fact that I've also had time in the private sector. And I think it's always good to get a range of perspectives. So there may well be another private sector career for me at some point in the future. We'll have to see.
We'll have to see. Well, thank you so much, John. That brings us to the end of our formal conversation. So you know what's coming up next.
I do.
So we end our podcast with a little tradition called the Know Your Neighborhood quiz, and how appropriate for us to be recording this podcast in your neighborhood. I feel like you're gonna ace this.
I don't know. I
absolutely think you're gonna ace this. So your neighborhood is obviously Wembley Park, and we ask 3 quick fire questions, and all you have to do is Let me know if you think that they're true or false.
Mm-hmm.
These facts are sourced from the internet. They have
Okay.
not been cross-verified for accuracy. However, whatever answer is on my notes will
That's
stand.
the answer.
And
Fine.
having said that, actually, walking from the station here, there was this beautiful
Yes, the timeline.
And I was thinking, oh my God, there are so many questions here.
Yeah,
John is
yeah.
definitely going to get all the answers. Anyway,
Okay.
are you ready?
away.
Fire away.
Yeah.
Let's go. All right. Fact number 1: the name Wembley originates from an Anglo-Saxon term meaning woodland clearing.
I think that's true. Wembers lay.
Oh wow, gosh. Yeah, I had a feeling you'd know all this. That is true. The name Wembley is derived from the Old English Wembale, meaning Wemba's clearing, referring to an early landowner in the area.
Yeah.
Oh, well done.
I did
So
know that.
you did know that. All right, fact number 2. Wembley Park was originally designed as a Victorian pleasure garden in the 19th century where Londoners would escape the smog in the city.
True.
Yeah, that I was pretty sure as I was saying it, you were like, I've got this. Yes, so that is true. Wembley Park was initially planned as a theme park with landscape gardens and ornamental lakes. And it was marketed as a London out-of-town resort.
Yeah.
And its transformation into a major event and residential district that you've talked about with the Wembley Stadium right next to us began with the construction of the stadium and continued through modern regeneration. However, I had a look at Google Maps and there isn't any actual park called Wembley Park anymore.
No, so the original Humphrey Repton landscape, and if you exit out the back of the Civic Centre, there's a little bust of Humphrey down in Elvin Gardens just outside. Much of that was lost, particularly around the Empire exhibition. It became much more built up. There were quite large landscaped areas as part of that, but they were progressively kind of lost over the years. The Quintain Master Plan does create a new park called Union Park, half of which has been delivered already, and the other half of which is due to open later this year. So there will again be a park back in Wembley Park, but
will it be called Wembley Park?
No, so it's called Union Park.
Right. Okay.
But yes, there will be a park again.
Yeah. I just found it fascinating that I was looking. I was like, I've never thought about it. I've lived in London for however long. That there's actually no park called Wembley Park.
No. No.
Anyway, all right. Fact number 3. Brent Council initially opposed the large-scale development of Wembley Park due to concerns over gentrification and local displacement.
I'm going to say false.
Okay, and why?
I'm going to say false because my understanding is that the council was desperate to find a way to regenerate this area, but really struggled to secure the investment. And I think I had understood that the FA were quite hesitant about it because I don't think there'd been much in the way of development piloted around major sporting stadiums. So that was my take on it, but I could be wrong.
Well, like I said, my notes are binding. So my note says true,
right.
But I can totally believe your version too. So in the early 2000s, there were concerns that Wembley's regeneration, led by private developers like Quintain, could lead to rising rents and pricing out local communities. But over time, Brent Council worked to secure commitments for affordable housing and community-led initiatives.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Cool. So 2 out of 3, not bad. I honestly thought you were going to nail it, but maybe the last one could have been.
Yeah, the last one was a tricky one.
It could have been. It could have been here or there. So anyway, but that just sadly means that our time has come to an end. It's been so much fun. You've been so generous with your insights and so honest as well. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being part of
Likewise.
this and talking place with me. And I look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure, John.
Likewise.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to join the conversation on social media with the hashtag #TalkingPlace. I would also love for you to leave our podcast a review and subscribe to all our podcasts and YouTube channels so you don't miss an episode. There's so much more to explore when it comes to creating good places, and I'm excited to do a deep dive into other topics with you in our next episode. I'm Tanisha Raffiuddin, and it's been my pleasure to be your podcast host. Thank you for listening. See you again next time, where we'll continue talking place. Talk soon.